She stood in his office doorway like a ghost he couldn't ignore anymore. The city lights behind her made her look almost unreal, but her words cut through the darkness like a blade. Choose me or lose everything. Her voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. She just stood there, waiting, while the most powerful man in the underworld went completely silent. The Mafia boss had faced down rival gangs, corrupt politicians, and men twice his size. He'd built an empire on fear and respect, turned violence into an art form, and made grown men cry with just a look. But right now, staring at this woman who'd somehow slipped past every wall he'd ever built, he had no words. His hands gripped the edge of his desk. Outside, the city hummed with life. People who didn't know his name but lived under his shadow. Inside this room, everything felt too small, too quiet, too real. You don't mean that, he finally said, his voice rougher than he intended. She smiled, but it wasn't kind. Try me. Then she turned and walked out, leaving him alone with a choice he never thought he'd have to make. The door clicked shut, and for the first time in 15 years, the Mafia boss felt something he'd forgotten existed. Fear, not of death, not of rivals or betrayal. Fear of losing her. It started 6 months ago, though he didn't notice it happening. She'd come to work at one of his legitimate businesses, a high-end restaurant downtown that served as a front for quieter meetings. Her name was Isla, and she was just a hostess. Nobody special. Nobody dangerous. That's what everyone thought. She didn't ask questions. Didn't stare too long when men in expensive suits whispered over their drinks. Didn't flinch when conversations ended abruptly the moment she approached the table. She just smiled, seated guests, and disappeared into the background like she was part of the furniture. The Mafia boss barely registered her existence at first. He had 1,000 things to manage, 100 people to control. Why would he notice one quiet girl who seemed perfectly content to stay invisible? But invisibility has its own kind of power. She learned how his world worked without anyone teaching her. She memorized faces, picked up on patterns, understood which tables meant business and which meant pleasure. She knew when to refill a glass and when to vanish completely. Most importantly, she learned to read him, the way his jaw tightened when someone pushed too hard, the slight shift in his posture when a deal went wrong, the exact moment his patience ran out, and somehow, without him realizing it, she became part of his routine. He started choosing tables where he could see her moving through the room, started noticing when she wasn't there, started feeling something that felt dangerously close to comfort when she was. That was a mistake. His mistake and hers. Because once you start paying attention to someone in his world, you can't just stop. The Mafia boss's empire wasn't built on violence alone. It was built on secrets. Everyone in his organization knew this. You could survive a war, outlast a rival, even recover from betrayal, but you couldn't survive exposure. The moment your secrets hit daylight, you were finished. His entire network depended on silence, deals made in whispers, alliances sealed with blood instead of signatures, names that existed only in memories, never on paper, except one name had been written down. Once, years ago, a name that connected him to something he'd spent a decade burying, something that would unravel everything if it ever surfaced. That name was Hawk. Hawk had been his partner once, back when they were both young and hungry and stupid enough to think they could change the rules. They'd started together, built together, bled together. But Hawk had wanted more, wanted to go bigger, louder, messier. The Mafia boss had said no. You don't survive by being loud. You survive by being smart. So Hawk left, took his ambitions elsewhere, and 6 years ago, Hawk disappeared. Not dead, just gone, like smoke. The problem was what Hawk had left behind. Documents, proof of things that could destroy not just a Mafia boss, but everyone connected to him. Politicians, judges, businessmen who thought their secrets were safe. Those documents were supposed to be destroyed, burned, scattered to the wind. But somehow, Isla had found one. His second in command, a man named Viper, cornered him after a meeting. Viper wasn't big on subtlety, which made him useful for certain jobs and dangerous for others. We need to talk about the girl, Viper said. The Mafia boss didn't look up from the paperwork. He was reviewing. What girl? Don't play dumb. Isla, the hostess. What about her? Viper leaned against the desk. She's been asking questions. Quiet ones. Careful ones. The kind that make me nervous. Now the Mafia boss looked up. What kind of questions? About old operations. Old partners. Viper's eyes were hard. About Hawk. The room went cold. When the Mafia boss asked, last week, she was talking to Angelo at the bar, real casual, like she was just making conversation. Asked if he'd been around long enough to remember some of the founding members. Angelo's old and drunk enough to talk, so he mentioned a few names, including Hawk. The Mafia boss's mind raced. This couldn't be coincidence. Nobody asked about Hawk unless they already knew something. Has she found anything? He asked. Not that we can prove, but boss. Viper hesitated. People like her don't stick around this long, without a reason. She's either incredibly lucky or incredibly smart. And lucky people don't survive in our world. What are you suggesting? Viper's expression didn't change. You know what I'm suggesting. Cut her loose. Permanently. The Mafia boss should have agreed. Should have nodded and let Viper handle it. That's how this worked. That's how you stayed alive. But instead, he said, no, not yet. I'll handle this myself. Viper stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Handle what? She's a liability. I said I'll handle it. Viper left, but not before giving him a look that said everything. You're making a mistake. You're getting soft. You're going to regret this. Maybe he was right. But the Mafia boss couldn't shake one simple fact. If Isla was digging into his past, she had a reason, and he needed to know what was before anyone died. He found her 2 nights later, leaving work alone. She didn't seem surprised when his car pulled up beside her. Get in, he said through the open window. She studied him for a moment, then slid into the passenger seat. No fear, no hesitation, like she'd been expecting this. He drove without speaking, heading away from the busy streets toward the industrial district where his words wouldn't carry. She didn't ask where they were going, just watched the city pass by like she had all the time in the world. Finally, he parked in an empty lot overlooking the river. The water reflected the moon in broken pieces, and the silence between them felt heavier than any conversation. Why are you asking about Hawk? He said. She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. Because I need answers. Answers to what? She turned to look at him, and for the first time, he saw something raw in her expression. Something hurt. My family disappeared 8 years ago. My parents, my little brother. One day they were there, and the next day they were just gone. No bodies. No explanation. Just empty rooms and sealed police files. The Mafia boss felt ice forming in his chest. What does that have to do with Hawk? My father worked for him. Did small jobs, transportation, deliveries. Nothing major. But one day, my father came home terrified. Said he'd seen something he shouldn't have. Said Hawk was involved in things that would make the news explode if anyone found out. She paused, her hands clenched in her lap. A week later, my family vanished. The police said they ran away. Started new lives somewhere. But my mother's jewelry was still in her drawer. My brother's favorite toy was still on his bed. They didn't run. Someone made them disappear. And you think Hawk did it. I know he did. I just need proof. I need someone to finally tell the truth about what happened. The Mafia boss's mind raced through possibilities, timelines, connections. 8 years ago, Hawk had been cutting loose ends before he disappeared. Anyone who knew too much became a problem. A loose-lipped driver and his family? They would have been easy targets. Why come here, he asked. Why work for me? Because you knew Hawk. You worked with him. And I thought if I stayed close enough, long enough, I'd find something. A name. A location. Anything. Did you? She pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket and handed it to him. He opened it, and his blood turned to ice. It was a transfer order, dated 8 years ago, signed by him, authorizing a crew to handle the driver situation. He stared at the paper, like it might catch fire in his hands. He remembered signing it, vaguely. Back then, he'd signed dozens of orders every week. Small problems that needed quiet solutions. Hawk had brought him this one personally. Said it was urgent, said it couldn't wait. The Mafia boss had trusted him. Signed without asking too many questions. And now, 8 years later, that signature was staring back at him like a ghost. "You've known about this for how long?" he asked. 2 months, Isla said quietly. "I found it in the restaurant storage room. Someone filed it wrong, put with old inventory records. I almost missed it. And you didn't go to the police." "The police?" She laughed bitterly. "Half of them are on your payroll. The other half wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. No, I needed something better than police." "Like what?" She looked at him directly. "I needed you to care." The words hit him harder than any threat could have, because somewhere along the way, between stolen glances and quiet nights at the restaurant, he had started to care, more than was smart, more than was safe. "I didn't know," he said, and he hated how defensive he sounded. "Hawk told me it was a business problem, a leak that needed sealing. I didn't know there were kids involved. But you signed it anyway." "Yes, I signed it anyway." Silence stretched between them like a canyon. Outside, the river kept flowing, indifferent to their pain. "I could have used this against you weeks ago," Isla said finally. "Could have given it to your rivals, to the authorities, to anyone who wanted you gone. But I didn't." "Why not?" She smiled, sad and tired. "Because I met you, and you weren't what I expected. You're not a monster. You're just a man who made terrible choices and learned to live with them. And somehow, against every instinct I have, She didn't finish, but she didn't need to." He understood. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "I want the truth. All of it. I want you to help me find what happened to my family. And then," she took a breath, "then I want you to choose. This life of secrets and blood and lies, or something real, something honest. Me." And just like that, the ultimatum crystallized. Not threats, not blackmail, just a simple, impossible choice. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of the Mafia boss's life. By day, he ran his empire like always, meeting decisions, problem solved with money or force. But by night, he and Isla became unlikely investigators. He pulled records that should have been destroyed, made calls to people who owed him favors, tracked down old crew members who'd worked for Hawk. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth emerged. Isla's father had witnessed a deal between Hawk and a federal agent. Hawk was selling information, playing both sides, building a safety net for himself at everyone else's expense. When the driver realized what he'd seen, he panicked, told his wife, started asking questions. Hawk had ordered the family eliminated, made it look like they'd fled, and the Mafia boss, trusting his partner, had signed the authorization without a second thought. But here's what neither Hawk nor the Mafia boss had known. The family hadn't died. The crew Hawk hired had taken the money, but grown a conscience at the last second. Instead of killing them, they'd shipped the family out of state with new identities and stern warnings never to return. Isla's parents and brother were alive, living in a small town in Montana under different names, too scared to ever reach out. When the Mafia boss told her this, Isla cried for the first time since he'd met her. Not sad tears, relieved tears, grateful tears. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping his hand. "Thank you." He should have felt relieved too, but all he felt was the weight of what came next. Because now she knew the truth. She had everything she needed. Her family was alive. The mystery was solved. She could walk away, start over, forget this world ever existed. Or she could stay, with him, and force him to become someone different. Viper caught wind of what was happening before the Mafia boss could control the narrative. Word spread fast in their world. The boss was distracted, compromised, making decisions based on emotion instead of logic. "This ends now," Viper said, barging into his office with 3 other senior members. "We've been patient. We've watched you throw away everything we built for some girl with a sob story. But it's over." The Mafia boss looked up slowly. "Careful how you talk to me." Or what? You'll do what you do to everyone else who crosses you? Except you won't. Not anymore. Because she's made you weak. The words stung because they were partially true. He had changed. Was changing. Every day with Isla made him question things he'd accepted for years. The violence. The corruption. The casual cruelty that kept his empire running. She's not the problem, the Mafia boss said quietly. Then what is? Viper demanded. Maybe I am. The room went silent. Nobody had ever heard him talk like this. Maybe I've been running this organization wrong. Maybe we've all been so focused on survival that we forgot there are other ways to live. Better ways. One of the other men laughed. You sound like a civilian. Next you want to go legit? Pay taxes. Follow rules. Maybe I do. Viper slammed his hand on the desk. Then you're out. We'll vote you out and take over ourselves. Because if you're not willing to do what needs to be done, you don't deserve to lead. The Mafia boss stood slowly, and despite everything, he still had presence, still had power. You think you can vote me out? You think I built this empire, so people like you could tear it down the moment I show an ounce of humanity. It's not about humanity, Viper said. It's about survival. And that girl is a threat. Then I guess you'll have to get through me first. The split happened fast. Half the organization sided with Viper, believing the Mafia boss had gone soft. The other half stayed loyal, either out of respect or fear, or both. But here's what none of them expected. The Mafia boss didn't fight back with violence. Instead, he started talking. To prosecutors. To federal agents. To journalists. He didn't betray his people. Not directly. But he started dismantling the corruption around his organization. Politicians who'd taken bribes found their names leaked. Judges who'd fixed trials suddenly faced investigations. Businesses that existed only to launder money got audited. The empire didn't collapse. It transformed. Piece by piece, the Mafia boss stripped away the rot, exposing everyone who'd grown comfortable in the shadows. Viper watched in horror as their world crumbled. You're insane, he said during their final confrontation. You're destroying everything we built. No, the Mafia boss said calmly. I'm destroying everything we became. There's a difference. In the end, Viper and his followers fled. Some got arrested. Others went underground. A few tried to retaliate, but found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Because the Mafia boss had learned something important. Real power isn't about who you can hurt. It's about who trusts you. And the people who'd stayed loyal? They were the ones who believed in something better. Isla found him on the roof of the restaurant 3 months after it all started. The city stretched out below them, glittering and indifferent. You gave up everything, she said, standing beside him. Not everything. Your empire, your reputation, half your people. He shrugged. I still have the restaurant. A few legitimate businesses. Enough money to live comfortably. He looked at her. And I have you, if you'll still have me. She smiled. That was always the deal, wasn't it? Choose me or lose everything. And I chose you. You chose yourself, she corrected gently. You chose to stop being the man everyone expected you to be and started being the man you actually are. I was just the excuse. Maybe she was right. Maybe he needed someone to give him permission to change. Or maybe he just needed to believe that change was possible. I talked to my parents yesterday. Isla said, they're coming to visit next month. My brother, too. He's 14 now. Plays basketball. Wants to be an engineer. That's good. They're scared of you. I don't blame them. I told them you saved their lives. Twice. Once when you found them, and once when you chose to become someone different. The Mafia boss didn't respond. He just stood there, letting the wind carry away the weight of who he used to be. So what now? Isla asked. Now we figure out what normal people do. Do you even know how to be normal? No, but I'm willing to learn, if you'll teach me. She took his hand, and for the first time in 20 years, the Mafia boss felt something he'd forgotten existed. Peace, not the absence of war, not the calm before violence. Just simple, honest peace. The kind you only find when you stop running from who you are and start building something worth keeping. I'll teach you, Isla said, squeezing his hand. But it won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. They stood there together. Two people who'd found each other in the darkest places and somehow built something real from a wreckage. Below them, the city hummed with life. Above them, stars fought through the light pollution to be seen. And between them, something unbreakable, something worth choosing. Everything.
Remember, loyalty builds empires. Betrayal destroys them. Choose power wisely. The underworld never forgets. The Boss Chronicle. Like and subscribe.